Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for TransLink's annual general meeting. My name is Tony Guglielmo, and I'm the chair of the TransLink's board of directors. So TransLink acknowledges, respects, and celebrates the Indigenous nations on whose territories we are fortunate to live, work, operate, and serve, and recognizes that in planning and managing the region's transportation system, we have a role to play in supporting reconciliation with Indigenous peoples. Today, we are gathered to reflect on 2020, a year in which our enterprise continued to work to develop meaningful relationship with Indigenous peoples. This important work will guide TransLink's approach to Indigenous relations now and into the future. It will support and promote a corporate culture and identity around sustainable Indigenous relationships and reconciliation. And it will enable meaningful and collaborative relationships with Indigenous communities and urban Indigenous peoples. I'd also like to recognize my fellow board members who have joined us today for the virtual annual general meeting. They include Larry Beasley, Sarah Clark, Jonathan Cote, Lorraine Cunningham, Harj Dhaliwal, Murray Dunwoody, Jack Froese, Karen Horcher, Handy Ross, and Marcella Zezel. So we have a full program today. First, our annual general meeting will run from about 9 o'clock until approximately 9:55. During the annual general meeting, you will hear from TransLink's Interim CEO, Gigi Chen-Kuo, Chief Financial Officer, Chris Dacre, Coast Mountain Bus Company President, Mike McDaniel, BC Rapid Transit Company President, Michelle Ledrac, and Transit Police Chief Officer, Dave Jones. You'll also hear from our special guest, the Honorable George Heyman, BC's Minister for Environment and Climate Change, and the Minister responsible for TransLink. Near the end of today's program, we have set aside time for a question and answer session. We will answer questions submitted in advance or during the event using Slido. If you are watching this event on Slido, you can submit your questions to the right of the live stream. The link to ask questions is also on our website at translink.ca/AGM. Around 9:55, we will conclude our AGM and take a 5-minute break before moving into our June open board meeting at 10 a.m. The open board meeting will be broadcast live on TransLink's YouTube channel. Hard to believe, but it was nearly 1 year ago to the day that we gathered for last year's AGM on June 18th, 2020. That meeting was our first ever virtual AGM, and we were all learning how to navigate new programs and technology, including how to find the mute button on Zoom. At the time, we were 3 months into the pandemic, and I imagine most of us on that call didn't anticipate that we'd still be meeting virtually 1 year later, yet here we are. It's an understatement to say that the year 2020 was unlike any other in recent history. The COVID-19 pandemic changed almost every aspect of our day-to-day lives, including how we work, study, socialize, shop, and move around our region. Today, you will hear about how TransLink Enterprise adapted to the extraordinary circumstances last year. And more importantly, you will hear stories of the people behind the scenes who kept our region moving and delivered for our customers when they needed us the most. On behalf of the TransLink board, I too want to thank the 8,000 plus employees across the enterprise who rose to the occasion and answered the call of duty in 2020, a challenging year that I'm sure none of us will forget for the rest of our lives. Before I conclude my remarks, I'd also like to acknowledge that 2020 was a year in which many societal issues and systematic injustice were amplified and magnified. Sadly, these issues have been a dark undercurrent in society for far too long. In recent months, circumstances related to the pandemic, along with current events and acts of racism, have rightfully led to important movements such as Black Lives Matter, Stop Asian Hate, and renewed calls for reconciliation with Canada's Indigenous peoples. I want you to know that advancing equity, diversity, and inclusion is a top priority for TransLink's board of directors, and TransLink made meaningful steps in this area in 2020. Earlier, I mentioned the work underway with Indigenous nations to develop meaningful relations with Indigenous peoples. In addition, in 2020, TransLink also recruited its first equity, diversity, and inclusion lead and appointed its first employee-driven EDI task force, which is looking at ways to make the TransLink enterprise an even more equitable, diverse, and inclusive workplace. In 2020, TransLink also began leadership training focused on topics such as diversity and inclusion, intercultural skills, and unconscious and cultural bias in decision makings. And they launched a new EDI speaker series for employees. This is just the beginning of our journey on equity, diversity, and inclusion. It will continue to be a major focus and top priority for our board of directors in the year ahead, along with our 4 corporate priorities in 2021, which include rebuilding customer ridership, fostering a safe, skilled, and resilient workforce, delivering a reliable transportation system in a state of good repair, and achieving financial sustainability. With that said, I'd now like to turn things over to our first speaker of the day, TransLink's Interim CEO, Gigi Chen Kwon. Over to you, Gigi.
Thank you, Tony, and thank you everyone for joining us today. My name is Gigi Chen Kwon, and I've had the honor of serving as TransLink's Interim CEO since February of 2021. Now, my relationship with TransLink goes back a very long way. I've been an employee since its inception in 1999, and I was with BC Transit before that time. And during my long career, I've had several legal and leadership roles, and I've had the opportunity to connect with various divisions and employees across the enterprise. And over the past 22 years, I've watched TransLink evolve, mature, and excel. And I've watched the enterprise overcome obstacles, navigate turbulent times, and emerge stronger and more resilient than ever. So today, as we're gathered virtually for our 2020 AGM, it's an opportunity to reflect on a year that's been a challenging one, to say the very least. The COVID-19 pandemic had a profound impact on our transit system and on other public transit systems across the globe. But where I think we were exceptional is that how we responded to circumstances that were completely out of our control, and how our employees pulled together in the public interest amid an unfolding crisis. Many of you are familiar with the adage, it takes a village to raise a child. And while here at TransLink, it takes a village to keep a village moving. And so throughout the pandemic, the employees at TransLink, Coast Mountain Bus Company, BC Rapid Transit Company, West Coast Express, and Transit Police did just that. They kept the region moving. And they continued to deliver not only an essential service, but an exceptional service. So service to people such as my independent-minded father, who continued to take transit to the grocery store, to take his long walks on the seawall, and also to all of his appointments as well. And as Tony mentioned, today we'll be sharing some of our employees' stories with you to give you a behind-the-scenes look at how our transit system operates and show you just a few of the remarkable people who moved us in 2020. But first, let's take a trip down memory lane. So cast your mind back to the beginning of 2020 when we began the year with momentum, excitement, and plenty of reasons for optimism. From 2016 to 2019, we experienced enterprise record ridership growth of 16% and also achieving record on-time performance highs as well. And in fact, one of our biggest challenges was just keeping up with that record-setting growth. We were rolling out some exciting new services across the region. Take January 6th, 2020, for example. Just 6 days into the new year, TransLink held a ribbon-cutting ceremony at the Coquitlam Central Station to officially launch our highly anticipated new rapid bus routes. Dozens of elected officials, community members, as well as TransLink Enterprise employees were huddled under a tent on that chilly January morning, many wearing bright green rapid bus toques. Actually, I'm sorry I missed that event myself, or else I might have snagged a toque for my collection. And then everyone boarded a rapid bus for a ceremonial first ride, brimming with excitement, standing shoulder to shoulder, snapping pictures and smiling. But then a little over 3 months later, everything did change. So I'm sure you all remember those anxious days back in March 2020. We were huddled in front of the television or our devices watching the news about the new coronavirus that was emerging. was dominating the airwaves, and we didn't really know much about the transmission or prevention. So there was a lot of uncertainty in the air. And one day, many of us corporate employees, were working together in the office as we normally did. And then seemingly overnight, those of us who could work remotely were asked to do so by our provincial health officer. I converted my home gym into my home office, or I guess that makes it my joffice. And then we also figured out how to use Skype, Teams, Zoom, and we all got pretty good at reading body language just from the shoulders up. And it's no secret that those early days of the pandemic were extremely challenging for the TransLink enterprise. By April, our ridership had plummeted to 17% of pre-COVID numbers, and our financial health was also suffering as a result. We were on track to losing $75 million per month. And to be honest, those were very difficult days. We were forced to contemplate really significant service cuts, which would have meant layoffs for our valued workers. So while we were facing a gut-wrenching decision, we made a plea to senior levels of government to enact emergency relief funding so that we could keep our region and our services and the people moving. And fortunately, governments did heed our call. And thanks to emergency relief funding from the government of British Columbia and the government of Canada, on May 8th, we were able to cancel all of the planned service cuts and rescind the layoff notices to employees. So this critical funding allowed us to stabilize transit service levels at similar to pre-pandemic levels so that the service is there for the frontline workers and others who had to make the essential trips. And transit, was their option of choice or perhaps their only option. And within weeks of receiving the funds, we launched our Safe Operating Action Plan, or as we know it, SOAP, and included enhanced cleaning measures, signage and decals to promote physical distancing, hand sanitizers across our region, and also barriers to protect our frontline workers. By June, we were able to resume front door boarding and increase our capacity back to 2/3. We introduced our Wearing is Caring campaign to promote and encourage mask adoption before it was mandated by our provincial health officer. And we also launched our open call for innovation, inviting entrepreneurs and the public to provide their ideas on how to improve the health and safety of customers on board transit, just to make sure that, if there was something we hadn't thought of, perhaps others out there would be able to provide some suggestions for us. In the summer, things did start to feel a little bit more normal. We completed our bike parkade expansion project, and we all know how biking sort of took off, particularly during the pandemic. And along with that, we had upgrades to Granville Station and Nanaimo Exchange. We resumed public engagement, beginning with our Burnaby Mountain Gondola project. And we also saw our ridership numbers steadily returning, and we restored SeaBus sailings to meet growing demand. But unfortunately, with the arrival of the second wave in the fall of 2020, our ridership numbers began to level off at about 40% of pre-pandemic levels, and that's about where they hover today. But undeterred, our team remained committed to finding ways to push the envelope, evolve the transit experience, and also just make our system one of the safest public places for our customers when they were ready to return. In late 2020, we became the first public transit system to test copper products on high-touch surfaces within North America. That industry-leading pilot project did make headlines across Canada and caught the attention of our transit system peers across the world. And more recently, we launched a second pilot project to test a technology called photocatalytic oxidation to sanitize the air and surfaces on board transit vehicles. And we're working on a third pilot, which should launch this summer as well. So TransLink finished the year 2020 retaining 48% of our ridership compared to 2019. This is one of the highest ridership retention rates among the 10 busiest systems in Canada and the US, second only to Los Angeles. And overall, we finished the year 4th in per capita ridership and 6th in total boardings, which I believe gives us a strong foundation to build from as we move forward. So without question, these past 15 months have been a really hard chapter for us all. We were actually shaken to the core when we learned that 2 of our Coast Mountain Bus Company employees passed away due to COVID. and we extend our deepest condolences to their families and their loved ones. And while it wasn't work-related, nonetheless, it underscored the severity of the pandemic for all of us, and also it hit all too close to home. And as we sit here today, we are now in step 2 of BC's restart plan, which is expected to unfold over the summer. And with each step, restrictions will start to ease, the economy will reopen a little more, and life as we know it will gradually return to a sense of normal. And in recent weeks, we've seen the vaccine rollout in BC progress quite quickly. More than 70% of British Columbians have had their first dose, and efforts are really ramping up to distribute the second dose. And I, speaking for myself, really looking forward to getting my second dose in the next couple of weeks as well. And if all goes according to plan, we'll be in the 4th and final stage of BC's restart plan by early September 2021. Means major events such as concerts and sporting events will be permitted again, and workplaces will be allowed to fully reopen. At the same time, colleges and universities will be resuming on-campus activities, and that's super encouraging news for us since students, post-secondary students, make up about 15% of our ridership during pre-COVID days during the school year. Now, our latest ridership projections are that by next year, we should recover to 70 to 90% of pre-pandemic levels, although a lot of that will hinge on factors that are beyond our control. That said, we are currently preparing a very robust and comprehensive, aggressive ridership recovery campaign. It's going to be targeted at bringing people back to transit, reminding them of their previous experiences with transit, letting them know that it is safe to return, and really celebrating our return to togetherness again, which I know many of us are eager for. And so why is ridership recovery so important? Because as ridership increases, our revenues increase, and this allows us to get back to reinvesting in service expansion. That in turn reduces congestion in the region and also reducing GHG emissions. So we're also thinking creatively about potential new revenue sources. And one of those is the potential to generate revenues in the longer term from doing real estate development on our transit assets. So that's something that we are actively working on in the months to come. This will also give our residents a sustainable travel option and increase ridership on our system. Now, to talk a little bit more about the importance of financial sustainability and provide an update on our finances, I'd now like to introduce Christine Dacre, TransLink's Chief Financial Officer. Over to you, Chris.
Thanks, Gigi. Since you've gone through the highlights of 2020 and the many challenges and accomplishments in the year, my update will focus on the financials. Thank you. Many of our operating revenue sources were impacted by COVID, specifically our transit revenues, fuel tax, parking rights tax, and development cost charges. Transit revenues were $386 million, which were $337 million below budget. Fuel tax revenues were $364 million, and this was $26 million below budget. Parking tax revenues were $47 million, which is about half of what was budgeted. And development cost charges were $20 million, $5 million below budget. In total, these revenue sources were $410 million lower than budget. Next slide, please. Due to the severity of our revenue losses, we deferred the planned service expansion, made some adjustments to service as ridership plummeted, and reduced other expenditures to only those necessary to maintain essential services to our customers and keeping the transit system infrastructure in a state of good repair. The operation, maintenance, and pavement rehabilitation program for the major road network was canceled. We implemented a hiring freeze. Benefits and overtime costs were lower. In-person public relations and consultations were canceled, and a number of studies and other one-time projects were deferred. Next slide. 2020 investments in capital projects totaled $528 million. $194 million was spent on infrastructure projects, largely from escalator replacements, SkyTrain passenger information displays, and B-line investments in corridors. 171 million on the planning and design of major construction projects such as Expo and Millennium Line upgrades, Surrey Langley SkyTrain, and a new operating and maintenance center for SkyTrain. 97 million was spent on bus replacements, Canada Line expansion, and SkyTrain vehicles. And 40 million was on equipment such as radio replacement, operations, telecommunications upgrades, and passenger address system quality improvements. And technology upgrades, there was about 27 million spent on that. Next slide, please. So securing relief funding from provincial and federal governments was critical for TransLink to continue delivering the essential transit services to the region. The 644 million we received offsets the net operating losses in 2020 and 2021, and also ensures lower fare increases for customers through 2024. Our capital borrowing program was the largest since 2010, when we started borrowing direct in the capital markets. We raised 650 million in the bond market. 250 million was a partial refinancing of our inaugural bond issuance in 2010, and 400 million was to fund our current 2020 capital program. I'm also happy to say that our two credit rating agencies maintained our AA credit rating. Next slide. To sum up, the senior government relief funding covers our net losses due to COVID through 2021. We are starting in a strong fiscal position. However, the uncertainty of ridership recovery and the significance of our revenue losses have created a deficit that will persist over the long term. This deficit is our focus as we develop our new 10-year investment plan in 2022, as we work with the Mayor's Council and the province of BC. Thank you, and I will now turn it back to Gigi.
Thank you, Chris. I would just add that our statutory annual report, as well as our 2020 accountability report, they're both actually available on our TransLink website, www.translink.ca. So as I mentioned at the outset of today's event, I've been an employee of the TransLink enterprise for 22 years. And during that time, I've met so many incredibly talented, dedicated, and committed individuals. So over the past 4 months, it's been such a privilege to serve as the interim CEO of TransLink, an organization that means so much to me, and to take the reins from Kevin Desmond, an exceptional leader who transformed our organization during his time with us. In about a month, I will hand the reins over to another Kevin Quinn, who's joining us from Maryland Transit Administration to begin writing the next chapter in TransLink's history. And on a personal level, I would like to sincerely thank all of the dedicated employees across the enterprise who remain so committed to our mission to serve the public. And all throughout this difficult time, which is it's so difficult and not easy. And it's been really a very difficult past 15 months. Our dedicated frontline employees, they never stopped going out every day, despite the uncertainty at the time, and deliver those essential transit services. And that took incredible courage. Our business technology services division, they turned on a dime and made sure that the employees who were able to work remotely could do so immediately. And at TransLink corporate offices, our support functions, such as legal services, which is a department near and dear to my heart, worked around the clock to advise the business as we entered uncharted waters. And TransLink's an enterprise made up of over 8,000 individuals across our region, including operators, attendants, planners, engineers, mechanics, cleaners, security officers, call center staff, and many, many others behind the scenes who keep our system running smoothly. And employees were the driving force behind our success during COVID, including being named the top transit system in North America in 2019. And it will be our employees who drive our region's recovery, both figuratively and literally, as we emerge from the pandemic in the coming weeks, months, and years. To celebrate just a few of those incredible individuals who kept our region moving in 2020, we put together a short video highlighting 4 different stories of employees at TransLink, Coast Mountain Bus Company, BC Rapid Transit Company, and Transit Police. Unfortunately, we couldn't pull together a video to celebrate all 8,000 employees, and if we could, we would, but we just wanted to take this time to celebrate the work that everyone delivered in 2020.
Hi everyone, I'm Mike McDaniel, President and General Manager of Coast Mountain Bus Company. Every day we put service on the road to meet the needs of our customers. Nearly 6,000 employees support this great machine we call Coast Mountain Bus Company, and they're always working for you. 24/7, 365 days a year. Their hard work and dedication impresses me every day. But in 2020, the pandemic put everyone to the test. And of course, they gave it their all in 2020. They showed up, they stepped up, and they were there for our customers. When people were told to stay home, CMBC employees were out on the road, in our garages and in our facilities, while a small number worked behind the scenes remotely. Despite these challenging times, they not only did their job to the fullest extent, they went above and beyond. I'm proud of all of our employees, from Access Transit and depot operations to finance, farebox, maintenance, and everyone in between. And today we'll speak with one extraordinary example, transit operator Frank Tsai, and we'll be joined by Manager of Transit Communications, Susie Hundle. Against the backdrop of the pandemic, our transit operators' jobs are more difficult than ever. But one morning, driving Route 408 in Richmond, Frank rose above the challenges of the day-to-day, and he saved a person's life.
Frank, tell us a little bit about what happened on that day.
When I passed the number 4 road, I saw a person facing down, lying on the ground. So I pulled over and stopped the bus. I walked back and I yelled into the person, no response. I called 911 right away. And 911 asked me to roll over the person. And so I put my gloves, turned to my earphone system, and I keep rolling, checking the person. But I tell the 911 no response. And meanwhile, fire truck arriving. So I told the 911 I will handle everything to the fire truck crews.
We're in a pandemic. How did you feel approaching that person?
I only feel like there's a person there. But after the 911 asked me to roll over the person, yes, I realized. But good thing the person with the mask and I'm with the mask, so actually I'm not really worried too much. And because we need to give somebody help.
So Susie, we had 2 of our transit supervisors attend. What was their impression of and being there to help?
The 2 transit supervisors are Deb Gill and Blake Webb. As unique as this may seem to some, transit supervisors do this day in and day out. And both Deb and Blake were very happy, just as Frank was, as soon as the mail started to breathe. And that was a relief for everyone.
Every day, we deliver so many trips. And there's things that happen on the road, and people need our help, extraordinary help as well. And it's great that our operators like Frank are there, and our supervisors are there to come in and help out in those situations. And they do such a great job.
Hi, my name is Grigorichenko, and I'm Interim CEO for TransLink. 2020 was a year unlike any other. It was a year that tested all of us. At TransLink, every single one of our employees was challenged to change how they work in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. It wasn't easy. It required perseverance, ingenuity, and on many days, courage. When I think back to the early days of the pandemic, there were so many employees working long days, late nights, and through the weekends. In every corner of our enterprise, employees went above and beyond the call of duty. They did it to keep our region moving, and they did it to be there for our customers when they needed us the most. 2 employees whose contributions were vital to our enterprise in 2020 were Derek Stewart and Dorit Mason. Together, they ensured that our customers and employees stayed safe amidst an unfolding global health crisis.
I believe that the most important thing that we did was continuing to deliver a safe and essential service for those people that needed it for work, essential work, or for essential reasons to travel. And we did that by thinking about cleaning, thinking about masks and physical distancing, following the provincial health officer orders and rules, and really making sure that we applied it to our organization so we could deliver that safe service. So what was really important is that we actually worked with our stakeholders, and they included organizations like the Provincial Health Office, the Emergency Management BC, Ministry of Transportation and Highways, and our other provincial entities. It was important that we worked with them so that we were aligned in response and fully understand what they were doing, that we could respond in a manner that was consistent throughout the province.
The thing that's most challenging, as well as probably the most rewarding, is the fact that we're learning new things every day. When we went into COVID-19, we had no idea how it transmitted. We had no idea how infectious it was. We had no idea how to keep ourselves safe. And we had to learn. And we learned by talking to our peers, by talking to our workers, by talking to the regulators, by talking to anybody who had any sort of knowledge, and trying to stay ahead of the curve.
Hi, my name is Michel Ladrak. I'm the President and General Manager of BCRTC. I arrived at BCRTC in 2019. We were experiencing high growth on a year-to-year basis. And then COVID happened, the pandemic, which created some massive challenges. Challenges that we had to overcome and improvise initially before we found our way forward. But the time in the end wasn't wasted. So the first thing we did was create a better cleaning regime, making sure that every day our trains were as clean as they could possibly be. Secondly, we used the time in the lower ridership to do some major engineering works. We worked on Waterfront Station. During a 52-hour maintenance window, we were able to do a lot of work that needed to be done and that would normally have been spread out across many, many weekends. We also renewed our passenger information displays at stations. They are now new and modern and give real-time information. So today, I think SkyTrain is in the best possible position. We're safer than we were before, we're cleaner than we were before, and the facilities are better and more modernized. One of the important people who helped me with this is Jack Lees. He's our Senior Contracts Manager, and together with him, we were able to implement lots of our actions.
Hey, Jack, how are you?
Very good, thanks.
I heard a lot about our cleaning regime. Can you tell me some more about it?
Absolutely, yeah. Maybe we step in here where it's a little more quieter.
Oh, let's do that. I know that we did a lot around cleaning and vehicle cleaning, right?
Yes.
Tell me something more about it.
Prior to the pandemic, SkyTrain was already doing 90% of the job. They were very detailed in their cleaning, and they actually did every train that went out that day in revenue service. They were cleaning it each night. What we've added mostly is the fogging and the misting, but we have also observed all the high touch points within each car. So around the windows, all the stanchions, including the ceiling, around the doors, that's all disinfected every single night. Some of the other modifications we had made with the fogger mister sprayer is we went through a few versions. We tried a commercially available one in the beginning and it just didn't stand up to the use. So then we moved over to paint sprayers because the atomization of the product that was being sprayed out for the disinfectant, it allowed it to cling to the surfaces the best. And then we ended up with a backpack sprayer that we modified the tip on in order to make the particulate, that mist, that small mist that's needed, that is required to stick to all the surfaces.
If I look at this, there's a lot of touch points, right, that need to be cleaned.
Absolutely, yes, there is, Michelle. And when people come here, this is the main center for cleaning. This is the BCIF at OMC1, and there's 12 cleaners on shift at a time. So typically it's 6 per train, because trains come to each of the cleaning lanes. And they're wiping down all the touch points. They've got a process for loose garbage.
Jack, I'm mightily impressed about what we did. People underestimate how complex a train is like this, with all the touch points and all the moving parts.
Yes.
It's quite a job, and people really stood up and made it happen. So I think we can be proud of that.
Absolutely.
Hi, I'm Chief Officer Dave Jones of the Metro Vancouver Transit Police. 2020 was a challenging year for all employees at Transit Police, including those working on the front lines during a pandemic, enforcing changing rules and regulations. Yet even amidst an unfolding crisis, Transit Police remained committed to not only keeping our transit system safe, but also forging meaningful relationships with the communities we serve. The pandemic also laid bare some significant societal challenges and systemic injustices, both here in Canada and around the globe, and has fueled important societal movements such as Black Lives Matter, Stop Asian Hate, and renewed calls for true reconciliation with Canada's Indigenous communities. Transit Police supports these vital movements and wants to play a role in driving positive change in our society and helping build a truly inclusive Canada. One example of our community building efforts in 2020 was the creation of the first Transit Police Indigenous Liaison Officer position. Constable Rattray has been instrumental in launching our Blue Eagle Community Cadet program, which builds relationships between police and Indigenous youth, as well as connecting the youth with Indigenous culture, mentorship, and leadership opportunities.
Our Blue Eagle program is for youth 12 to 15. We're Indigenous focused, so we do Indigenous protocols, teachings, cultural events, that sort of thing. So you don't have to be Indigenous to be in our program, so as long as you're youth 12 to 15 and you're interested in learning about Indigenous culture and protocols, we want them to know that it's a safe place for them to be, number one. Number two, that we want to try and give them other options as far as activities. We're looking at providing presentations from career options, but also other things like art. Tonight, for example, we have drum making. So we have Mr. Leach from the Aboriginal CPC. He's here leading the group in drum making. We're not in uniform, right? We're in our cadet shirt. Hopefully it shows that, you know, the police are different than everybody else.
These kids don't call me Sergeant Cheryl Simkin, they don't call me Simkin, they call me Cheryl, and sometimes they call me Mama Bear. but they know me as Cheryl.
So we want to build that trust and, like I said before, just kind of make it a safe place for them. Not only for physical safety, but also for emotional safety, right?
With the horrific news that the 215 children have, their bodies have been found, it's nice to know that we have someone that we can talk to and express these feelings of just sadness and like disbelief that this is happening. It helps us not only become more aware about our surroundings and the community in which we live, but it also like teaches us about this culture.
It's a really fun place and you should try it.
Well, I really love how that video showcases our employees, and I'm so proud of the work that they do each and every day. I would just like to add a note that Dorrit Mason, who was featured on that video just now, she's that special someone that always proactively checks in on me during the past 15 months and just drops a line to see how I'm doing, checking on my mental well-being. And I must say that when I do get one of her texts, that does brighten my day for sure. So at this point, I hope that that video gave you a great sense of how our employees are undeterred by hardship. They are resilient beyond measure and resolute in their commitment to the people of this region. And now it is my pleasure to introduce a video from our special guest, the Honorable George Heyman, BC's Minister of Environment and Climate Change Strategy, and also the Minister responsible for TransLink.
Good morning. I'm happy to join you for this TransLink annual general meeting from the traditional territories of the Songhees and Esquimalt First Nations. Once again, we're meeting virtually, but I know we're all hoping that next year people will be able to participate in person in a safe place. The last year has been incredible, unlike anything any of us have experienced. The pandemic has really upended people's lives and demanded incredible sacrifices from everyone. And that's been true in the world of public transit, like elsewhere. I know there's so many among you who felt the impact of the pandemic very profoundly. That's why it's even more impressive that you, individually and as a community, overcame so many challenges to deliver the vital transit services that many of us require. Many of the people at this AGM are among transit users who care deeply about the system. So I want to thank everyone for the dedication, the creativity, and the continued efforts to ensure that this vital public service for people of Metro Vancouver was continued through TransLink. That includes people at the Coast Mountain Bus Company, the BC Rapid Transit Company, In Transit BC, West Coast Express, and the Transit Police, in addition to the people who work directly for TransLink, and of course, the public. One thing this pandemic has made absolutely clear: success comes when British Columbians work together and put the public's interest first. Everyone's done incredible work to keep us moving forward, despite serious concerns and worries. Public, of course, were concerned that transit services would be for them. So many people are dependent on those services, particularly frontline and essential workers, to get to healthcare institutions, food service operations, or other operations that made it easier for the rest of us to feel safe. For operators who are on the front line, facing people every day and not having a lot of information about the pandemic, the virus, and how it could be transmitted, there was worry every day about the possibility of bringing an infection home to their families and loved ones. Everybody had to find ways to keep the system going at a lower capacity and keep it going safely. But I'm confident that as we're coming through this, we'll work together to build a better future, a stronger future, a cleaner future, and that the public transit system in Metro Vancouver, as well as elsewhere, is such a critical part of that. That's why, along with our federal partners, we put $675 million for our Safe Restart Fund for TransLink. We know that with reduced revenues, we could not cut back on service. That would mean that more people would look for other alternatives because they would have no choice. The impacts of that on our public transportation system would go on for years, if not decades. We know that keeping the system functioning, providing the routes and frequency on which people depend is critical. And we know, of course, that TransLink has to be able to operate and have the funds to do so. Reliable, safe, and affordable public transportation is so critical to our communities, to our planning, to healthy air, and to ensuring that we're reducing greenhouse gas emissions as part of our fight against climate change. We know how critical the work that over 8,000 people employed across the TransLink network has been. It will continue to be critical. It's vital to our economic recovery. It's made a material difference in the lives of people across Metro Vancouver. So on behalf of our government, I want to extend a sincere thank you to everyone at Public Transit and TransLink for your service over the past year. We know that there's brighter days ahead as we begin our restart plan. We want to bring people safely back to a more normal way of interacting and a more normal life in our communities. As Dr. Bonnie Henry says, there is light at the end of the tunnel, and it is getting brighter every day. People continue to be vaccinated, and that makes me cautiously optimistic that in the not too distant future, we'll have a life that looks a lot more like what we were used to before the pandemic. And when that day comes, I want to assure you that our government will continue to support the efforts to provide vital public services like public transit that TransLink provides to everyone in Metro Vancouver. Together, we're making a meaningful contribution to reduce pollution and improve our communities. One more thing I'd like to do before I conclude is to acknowledge the tremendous contribution made by Grigorichenko as the Interim Chief Executive Officer of TransLink. Gigi's long history with TransLink, your professionalism, your commitment to the organization has served everybody in the community so well. We all owe you a great deal of thanks. Thank you for your commitment and hard work over the past year. Thank you to everyone who works for TransLink and the constituent organizations for your work, and thank you to the public who have been patient, and who continue to use public transit. I hope to see you in person at next year's annual general meeting.
Well, thank you again to Minister Heyman for providing those remarks. I must say that it has been my absolute honor to have been able to serve in this capacity and to be able to serve this dedicated workforce that keeps our region moving. We've now reached the final portion of our AGM program, and that is the question and answer portion from the public. And as a reminder, we're taking your questions through Slido. If you're watching this event through Slido, you will see the Q&A box on the right-hand side of your screen, or you can visit slido.com and enter the event code #TLAGM. And to help moderate today's Q&A and close out today's event, I'd like to introduce Jill Drews from our TransLink Corporate Communications team. Over to you, Jill.
Thanks, Gigi, and good morning, everyone. So we've received quite a few questions on Slido, and I'll try to get to as many of them as possible. I'll read out the question, and then I'm going to direct it to the person who's best suited to answer it. So I guess let's get started. Our first question reads, TransLink has a high rate of letting people go or people leaving. Is this a cultural issue? And what is TransLink doing to hire the right people and keep them? I think this is a question best answered by you, Gigi. I'll let you take that one.
Sure. I think that I don't think it's actually accurate to say that we have a high rate of people leaving. I think that our turnover rates are actually fairly low, and that attraction and retention has been one of our corporate priorities for quite some time. And so I know there's been a lot of work through our Human Resources division to make sure that we have fair hiring practices, that we have a welcome and inclusive culture as well. And I think, as you heard earlier through Tony's remarks, there's been a lot of work and commitment done in that regard.
Thanks, Gigi. I'll keep you on the spot here with the second question. How is TransLink committing to reconciliation, decolonization, and anti-racism? One issue this person points out is the Board and Mayor's Council do not reflect the region's diversity. What can you say on that?
I would just start by saying that our commitment to equity, diversity, and inclusion is a real one. And I know from working day in and day out with the board, with the senior leadership team, and also with the mayors, that that is foremost in their mind. And I would say that EDI is a journey. And so that journey begins with awareness. And as awareness builds, and as we encourage dialogue around this particular issue, we will be able to undertake more initiatives and do more in this regard. I think Tony's remarks already alluded to some of the things we've done. We've hired someone who is an EDI lead. We have started a speaker series. We have various initiatives. I sponsor an employee resource group for caregivers, and there's many, many other initiatives that we've launched. But as I said earlier, it is just the start of a journey, and it's, for me, something that I've been also sharing with employees in terms of my own personal experiences, and hoping that others will also feel comfortable opening up. And together, I think we'll be able to move this forward.
Thanks for those thoughts, Gigi. Now let's turn to ridership. Our next question reads, as BC begins to reopen, what is TransLink's plan to recover ridership? So to address this one, I'll turn it over to our Vice President of Customer Communications, Marketing, and Public Affairs, Steve Vanagas.
Yeah, really good question, really important question. We want transit to be top of mind and people's first choice as they're going back to work, going back to their offices, going back to campus this fall. So we have a number of measures that we're working on to help encourage all of that and get our ridership back. First of all, we got to maintain our services. We know how important reliability and frequency is to the public and our ridership. And thanks to the support of the province and the government of Canada, we've been able to do that throughout the pandemic, and we're going to keep doing that. Maintaining services is so important. But then we got to get people comfortable again with riding transit, and that means reassuring them about safety and the safety of the system. That means reintroducing many of the great services we've offered just before COVID started, and then reminding people how great transit is to connect all over the region, to get out there and enjoy our parks, our recreation areas, our events, community fairs, shopping areas, you name it. We want to really connect people with that. And then we've got to get people back in the habit of taking transit again. So you're going to see us providing some new incentives as we approach the fall. And also you're going to be seeing a number of highly visible campaigns that really brings the energy back. So we're really optimistic about our ability to help get ridership back up through all of those measures. Back to you, Jill.
Thanks, Steve. Our next question deals with the idea of layoffs or furloughs. Gigi, I'll leave this one for you. With the decline in revenues, does TransLink see any layoffs or furloughs in the near future?
I would say thanks to the senior government funding that we received, which allowed us to maintain the service levels, and we don't contemplate any layoffs. We are going to need all hands on deck in order to keep the system moving. And as Steve mentioned, as we welcome riders back, we want to make sure that we provide them with a great customer experience.
Thanks for that, Gigi. We have time for probably one more question here, and it's about the idea of whether or not employees would need to be vaccinated to return to work. Gigi, this is probably the best person to answer this question. Are we looking at any sort of employee policy when it comes to vaccines?
I mean, at this point, again, this is uncharted territory sort of for our region and really for the world. So we are going to be taking our guidance from provincial health. And of course, we will be looking at, what is best practice in this regard. So at this point, we don't have a vaccine policy, figured out, but we are, as part of our future of work, as we're talking about bringing people, bringing them back into the office to a greater extent, that will be something that we'll be looking into.
Okay, thanks, Gigi. And thank you everyone for all of your questions, and apologies to those I couldn't get to today. A full recording of this meeting will be available on our YouTube channel later today. We thank you for joining us for our virtual AGM and welcome you to join us in a few minutes at 10 a.m. for our June open board meeting. You can find that on TransLink's YouTube channel.